So, it looks like there was a recent move, and then you had some like dog reactivity or aggression that then led to a human bite.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead and fill me in.
So this is Apollo, 2-year-old. He's half. His dad was lab, a black lab, golden retriever, Stratford Terrier mix. So his mom was a Stratford Terrier. His dad was mixed. So he was a rescue dog. We rescued him and his brother. His brother was left behind in Texas.
Okay.
We rehomed him. They were told because they were brothers, twin brothers. They were
The fighting.
not fighting with each other. They loved each other. It was just they were ganging up on other dogs.
Oh, I see. They were working like a team.
Yeah.
I see.
And
A lot of
then-
times they have what's called sibling syndrome.
Yes,
where they
sibling
fight each
syndrome,
other.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
And that led over there to another incident. I think it was more his brother. We don't know exactly. So someone had, they've gone to daycare. They were boarding. They were all fine, but they were hyper. So we decided we have also a chocolate lab. Her name is Cookie. She's 10 years old.
Okay.
So we moved here. We couldn't bring 3 dogs, so we rehomed one of them, and that has worked out. So we brought him with us. But the move, I guess, has sparked more fear and anxiety that led to an aggression. So he's new to apartment buildings, elevators. We were going up and down, and every time he would see a dog, he would just get aggressive.
Sure.
So there is call it a, I don't know, relief area in the building on the 10th floor. So we had to take the elevator, go to the relief area. It's pretty big. I would say like maybe half the size of this room. But every time we would let him off leash, a dog would approach him. You would see his lip go up,
Sure.
growl, and try to attack
Sure.
the other dogs. It was okay with humans up until I guess last week, where my older one brought him down, and as they were crossing paths between the elevator, he was trying to get to the elevator to get back to the apartment. The other dog was trying to get to the
Go ahead and hold them.
to the relief area. There was a dog, and they started getting at it, and he was in that state of mind. There was an innocent bystander there, and he ended up biting her.
Was she trying to break up the fight, or was she
No,
just
she was
standing
just-
nearby?
There was a party going on.
Okay.
So there was a lot of people, and it was a small area, and the way you have to go to the relief area is by going through that.
I see.
So they were going through a hallway, let's say, like it was from, let's say, here to the wall.
Okay.
And they were trying to pass, but there was another dog he was trying to get. There was people in the middle.
Sure.
So
In the frenzy, she got bit.
it was in the inside area trying to get to the elevator. So there was I guess a Christmas party going on. One of the tenants was throwing a party
Sure.
On that floor. So there's a open area. So he was barking. I wasn't there, unfortunately. So the other dog was at it. They were at it, and my older one was trying to hold him, but I think he went up and he was just biting, or like, and maybe she put her hand out. I don't know what happened.
Sure.
She ended up getting bite here.
Was it like a full-on puncture bite? Was it?
You could see definitely the puncture, but there was no blood. There was like no blood gushing. She got her through the jacket. So,
I see. So not probably just enough to make contact, but not enough to penetrate.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So I followed up with her. She said, "Well, it didn't go in. They gave me some antibiotics,
Sure.
just in case." And that was it.
Okay.
That's the last we heard.
Okay.
Since then, I've been walking him outside, trying to avoid that relief area. He's been.
Is Rue in there? Yeah. Okay. Just be careful coming in and out.
He's been doing okay, I guess. He's been in the elevator with me with other people. He sniffs. He doesn't bark. It's just when I think there's another dog in the area, that's when he gets kind of reactive. Like I said, it's a change because he's the first a year and a half we had him. We brought him to daycare. We boarded him. He was playing well. At the beginning, obviously, there was more of, I guess, I'd say the first month or so is just trying it out. And he was a little bit playing aggressive with his brother. But after that, there was no incidents. He was playing well. He loved it there. We would board him, training, daycare. But I think with the move, something has changed. And now he's gone into, I guess that's from here. I don't know if it's aggression. I don't know if he's scared. Obviously, his tail is always down. I brought him to the vet, and his tail was down. He was trembling because he was so afraid. Usually, we brought him to the vet before, but he was fine. Now he was fine. He let them check out. There was no.
He was just uncomfortable and like fearful.
Uncomfortable, but again, I've never, except for that incident that happened, I've never seen him like attack another human voluntarily or.
Sure.
With the dogs, he'll stand his ground and I've witnessed it twice, and that's when I stopped going, where he would growl and I would see the lip go up. And then after 3 or 4 seconds, if the dog is still there, they're both eye contact, he'll just jump at them.
I gotcha. Okay. And I'm sorry, I forgot this at the beginning of the consultation. I have 3 staff members that live on premise, and then 2 live up here. So if you see them just coming through, that's who they are. One has a dog here, and then one has a cat, which is why I was like, keep them on a leash there. So what you're dealing with is not out the ordinary, so to speak. I've seen it time and time again. I had a client that literally moved like a block over, and their dog went from loving everybody to like very aggressive. Like, and I when I was doing the assessment and everything described, I'm like, this sounds pretty standard, blah, 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 blah. And then when I went in and actually did an in-home, I'm like, wow, this guy's legit. Just from moving a block over. And that's one time of that happening to that degree with the client in like 12 years of training dogs, but not uncommon where someone moves from the suburb to the city, or from the city to the suburb, or from, another state to here, where there's gonna be a change in behavior. And so you've already been here for more than a month, is that correct?
No, this is our 3rd week here.
Your 3rd week, okay. So general rule of thumb is it takes dogs around 2 to 4 weeks to settle into a new environment, to find their place, okay? Typically by now, we should see the dog, like anything that would change would have changed, like because you're 3 weeks in. So you might think like, in the beginning in the home, he was kind of nervous, but now in the home, he's fine, right? So we know, okay, that's been resolved. You gonna say something?
So he's not, that's the other thing I was gonna leave. So in home, he's very anxious.
Yep.
Our crate broke, so now we ordered another crate. He scratches at the door, like even though like he
and
has
this is all new.
Sorry?
This is all new.
Yeah, he would, before he was anxious when we would leave him alone, but he wasn't scratching at the door or anything. Now he's like destructive in a sense, where I left an Amazon box and he completely destroyed it because he was by himself.
Okay. And this did not happen in Texas?
It happened once when he was a puppy, I guess.
Sure.
But then it got better, and then he was fine. We would leave him. We would leave, come back. It was normal behavior. But now again, he's gotten, I guess, more anxious at home, and he's scratching the door.
Correct.
I put a camera there just to see, and he's constantly scratching. He ended up opening the door the other day because he was up scratching.
Oh, sure, you got one of those.
And it's like a latch like that, so he ended up. And luckily I was on the camera, and I was like, oh shit, like he got out, and he was out.
Yeah.
He was on the floor in the hallway. Luckily I was close by, and I went to get home and put him back in the home.
Yeah.
But yeah,
so that's another thing that you're dealing with.
Correct.
Gotcha. So then, and you said now in the high rise?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. And then before you did not?
No, we were at a home in the suburbs of
Family
Texas.
Home. Yeah.
He had his backyard. He would go out, do whatever he wanted. Like I said, he would go to daycare 3 times a week. Board him every other week. We would, even before we left, we boarded him for a week. We came here, moved whatever, came back, got him. He was regularly boarded. We went on vacation. He was always in daycare, and we would board him. He wouldn't have any issues. But again, now we can't.
You broke the norm. Yeah. So again, all that makes sense because you went from quiet suburban family home Texas to busy Chicago, high-rise building, a lot of traffic. And dogs are very sensitive to energy. Okay, so for us, like when you come to Chicago, you go in knowing like it's gonna be loud, there's more traffic. Traffic sucks. This is very busy. If you're in the loop or in this downtown area, you know how congested it's going to be, right? You already know that going into it, so you can kind of mentally prepare yourself. Whereas dogs don't. It's like we're here and then we're here, right? And that's, in my opinion, where all this is coming from, is the change in energy. The cars, the honking, the people, the lights, all that, I describe it as energy because it's a lot, right? Because once you go into like a suburban area of Illinois, you're like, oh wow, it's so quiet out here, right? It's a quieter type of energy. So many dogs have the issue that you're dealing with because all that energy puts him under stress, okay? So then he's unsure, he's fearful, right? Good thing is he's curious, he's not completely shut down. But he already goes into the world under stress. So then you add something on top of that, and then they go to the next stage, which is reactivity or aggression, okay? When we go to what happened with that young lady, again, also not uncommon because, and how old's your oldest?
He's 15.
He's 15, okay. So your son, I'm sorry, it's your son?
Yeah.
Your son's walking him out, right? He's going through the hallway. It's a congested hallway. There's a party. People are probably loud, right? He hears the energy. And it's tight quarters. You got another dog approaching, right? And so then he's like under all that stress and he's like, okay, here's a potential threat. It triggers something. And so what happens is, and that's why I asked if somebody tried to stop the fight, because that's typically where people get bit. Is there's this frenzy and they reach in, and in the frenzy they get bit because the dog's not knowing who is who, right? It's like a bar fight. I think she just happened to be too close or whatever, right? And then he just, in that frenzy, started going because he was just completely gone.
Right.
I wouldn't describe it as, or think of it as, he has intention to harm a person. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I get dogs like that.
And that's what I'm saying. I don't think his intention was to hurt that person.
Correct.
Again, there was an incident in Texas where, so we have an SUV and we opened up the latch and him and his brother were there. We were dropping off at daycare. My wife was there and they saw a dog and they started barking. And my wife tried to like close the latch and put them back in and they grabbed her. They bit her. Again, did they tend to bite her? I don't think so.
No,
but
yeah.
it was just because.
I would agree. That's not intentional. It's that there's all this frustration towards the threat. They can't get to it, and the closest thing would happen in that moment was your wife's hand. So they go for the hand. So we have what's called redirected aggression. So when we're dealing with any kind of aggressive dog, like dog or human, especially when they're leash reactive, which is lunging and barking on a leash, I call it up and away, where we go like this with the leash, because we anticipate the dog's going to be so frustrated at some point that they're going to redirect that aggression to the closest thing, which is more often than not the leash. Okay, but every now and then we get a dog that will intentionally target the handler instead of the leash, or other dogs that'll target the leash and then eventually it just goes to the handler, right? And typically when it's towards the owner or the handler, we know going in because the client will already tell us. They're like, yeah, this guy will redirect towards me. So then we know how to plan ahead because they've already told us, my dog already does it. But if we have a dog that we've not seen it before, we always anticipate it may happen so that we can prevent it from happening, okay?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would agree that in that moment, it sucks, but that's what I would call redirected aggression, and it was not, in my opinion, intentional.
And I guess that's why I'm here. I don't believe it. I just want a opinion of, one, what to do, and two, is it really human aggression, or is it that aggressive, or?
Yeah, no. In my opinion, no. He's not human aggressive, okay? If he was human aggressive, you would come in going, Jesse, I got a problem. This guy wants to bite every person that comes into my house or wants to bite any person that walks past us, Like it's a habit. What you have are one-off occurrences, and in both situations, they were in a state of reactivity, and then someone got too close. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So.
And we haven't let anyone in the house yet. We're kind of cautious of that. And
yeah, that would be wise.
But I do walk him. We're in downtown, Arizona River North. I walked him down State Street, Michigan Avenue. At the beginning, he wasn't. He was just go. I want to go back home. The last week or so, he's been more, let me sniff.
Yeah.
He's been sniffing,
Good.
Curious,
Good.
going through. He does avoid every dog, though. He's not going towards them, he avoids them.
Yep.
So he walks away from them, or he'll come by my side because he doesn't want to deal with it.
Yep.
But he'll sniff now. So
Good.
again,
So that's that. Remember that 2 to 4 week thing that I was telling you about? You were like the first week he didn't want to do it. He just wanted to get home. But now he's starting to come out of shell.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay. So it's really more exposure, but it's also more exposure where the dog is in a passive state. So to give an example, let's say you walked him and he was in this very flighty mental state, right? And he wants to just get home. And let's say it wasn't getting better, right? You're like, Jesse, I walk this guy 3 times a day trying to get him used to the environment. He just panics. I go, okay, the exposure is not helping him because we need to expose him, but also bring him back to passiveness. Because every time he walks, if he's in a state of frenzy and it's not resolving itself in time, you're just putting your dog under stress, and it's building and building and building and building and building and not really getting better, right? In your case, it's getting better. So that's always the main thing too, is whenever we expose a dog to a stressor, it's okay to be stressed about stuff. It's okay, that he feels uncertain or fearful and all that, right? Because he's in a completely new environment that's much different energy than what he knows. But what's not okay is how he handles or expresses that stress, right? So if he always chooses aggression, obviously that's not healthy. We need to teach him there are other options. And that's where I come into play, okay? So in my opinion, you do not have a human aggressive dog, okay? You just happen to have a situation where all the right things happen at the wrong time, that he ended up biting that young lady. Thankfully, it wasn't a full-on punctured bite, If he wanted to do like real harm, he would have done it. If he had the capacity to get to that point, he could have gone even further. Which is another thing I look at. That's why I asked were there punctures, were they deep punctures and all that stuff. All that gives me information because we have a dog currently that I'm working with, and he piano bites. And piano biting is when they bite frantically, and they're not even puncturing. It's just the teeth going like this. Right? And you look at and you might be a little scratched up, but there's no punctures. But there's like 20 bites, And that tells me, I'm like, the dog freaked out and went into aggression, but the dog was panicked and not confident enough to actually do harm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So all these things tell me stuff. So in my opinion, what we do here is try to get this guy back to stability or neutrality, but on our terms. Right now, he's going on his terms, right? The first week, he was just wanting to go home. Now he's starting to sniff and be more kind of explorer, right? But we need to do it from the get-go on our terms. So it's kind of like, with kids growing up, I did stuff with my parents, and I was like, you may not like this, but you're going to do it. You know what I mean? It's kind of that same mentality, but you have to have the right tools and communication with your dog in order to make that happen. And this goes back to what I was mentioning earlier. I'm like, if he's in a state of stress and you keep exposing him to that stressor and you're not helping him through it to where he can learn to handle it, you're just potentially creating a bigger problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So questions on any of that stuff so far?
I'm sorry?
Questions on any of that stuff so far?
No, I guess the only question is, I started walking him more instead of just bringing him to that relief area in the building.
Yep.
I started walking him outside, and like I said, it gotten better. There are days though where, I think, was it yesterday when it was like raining and snowing type of thing, he was like, he just wanted to go back home.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to expose him more to like noise and stuff like that.
Yep.
Again, I don't know if it's helpful. Should I limit it?
In your case, I think it's helpful because you've already noted it's getting better.
Okay.
If it wasn't getting better, I would just tell you do what you need to do. If your intention is, I'm going to do training, then it would be like, okay, well, do what you need to do just to get him the potty and stuff until we start, right?
Okay.
But if she's making progress, I'm like, yes, you can keep doing it. The rain and snow stuff makes sense because it was sleet, and if he's never seen sleet before, it's going to be weird for him, right? So, and then that's other things that we look at as well. If it's like, oh yeah, he was in an elevator and he like shit himself, I'm like, well, had he ever been on the elevator before? You're like, no. I'm like, well, that's why. It all makes sense, right? But if it's like he's been on 100 elevators and for whatever particular reason this elevator is a problem, then I go, okay, that's out the ordinary. We need to work on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the other things were kind of fearful at the beginning because he didn't want to go in. Now he'll go in. He'll actually sit, which I find surprising. He'll sit beside me. I don't know if he's afraid or not, but he'll go into the elevator and sit
He's using
next
it for
to me.
security.
He'll just sit until we're ready to go in and say, okay, let's go.
Everything should always feel like it's getting better.
Okay.
Okay, whether you're doing training or either formal training or like when you're just doing stuff on your own, because it makes sense, right? Like, okay, my dog is afraid of outside because it's so busy. I'm going to do more exposure, desensitization therapy, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? It should always feel like it's getting better. In your case, it's getting better. Okay. In other cases where you're like, hey, Jesse, there's this particular hallway. It's just, man, he freaks out every single time, and he's been through it 100 times. It's not getting better, right? He's stuck. So we have to help him through that. Okay. So one thing that I could tell you is whenever he's in this state here where he's unsure, is never pet him to console him.
Yeah.
Okay, he has to just go through it himself. If you pet him, you're telling him he should feel this way in this environment. Okay, because petting is a reinforcer. It's a very subtle thing, but it's something that almost all people do because we don't want to see our dogs look like they're under stress or anything. So we usually want to make them feel better by petting and loving on them. But it actually does the reverse thing, which is telling them you need to keep feeling stressed.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Got it.
So the best thing to do is just this: ignore him, let him figure it out on his own. We're just limiting his range of motion, so he only has so much space. Because sometimes if there's too much space, the dogs can get stuck, and then you'll see them get anxious and keep pacing around unhealthily. Okay. Other questions?
No, no. I guess what to mention. So there's no direct area where he's afraid. He'll go anywhere. It's just like I said, when he'll encounter another dog. If we get elevator and there's another dog, lately it depends. Like the smaller dogs, he'll just ignore. Some of the bigger dogs, he'll just depends on the other dog and the energy. I guess he'll just start barking.
Yep. And you said outside he's avoidant.
Outside, yeah, he'll avoid. He'll look at them. He won't do anything. He'll just try to avoid them. But in the elevator or in the hallways, he'll bark.
Can you see why that is?
I don't
What's
know.
the difference between a hallway and outside?
Yeah, I guess more close space.
Yeah, the proximity, right? There's nowhere for him to run, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like we get dogs that are leash reactive, but then off the leash they're completely social. And the owner's like, it's crazy. I'm like, yeah, it's because so we have 4 responses to stress: fight, flight, avoidance, submission. Have you heard of these?
Yeah,
Right?
Caesar Milan. Yeah.
Yeah, Caesar Milan, right? The big 2 are always fight or flight. And then avoidance and submission are when the dog realizes fight or flight isn't an option, okay? So typically those are the first 2 things. I want to attack this to protect myself, or I'm going to run from this to protect myself, right? So when he's on a leash, which of those 2 is gone?
Well, no, it doesn't fight. Flight, I guess.
Flight is gone, right? Because he's tethered to you. You have that leash on him, right? He can't get away. So in the hallway or on the elevator where there's close proximity and he can only go so far, he's like, well, I can't run from this, and I'm not going to try to avoid it. Avoidance is, have you ever been at a store and you see someone you don't want to talk to and you go down a different aisle, or you pretend like you're doing something else? That's avoidance behavior. Submission is, oh, there's a dog in the hallway, nothing I can do, I'm going to just tolerate this, right? So that really, and he's not going to do that either. So really all that leaves is fight response. But once you go out into the open world, even though he can't run, there's so much more space that it takes off a lot of that stress, because he's like, well, at least there's space for us to get away from this potential threat, okay? So now then he's choosing the avoidance behavior, which is going to the opposite side, going away from them, which is healthy. Okay. Whenever we deal with aggression, we always want the dog to choose avoidance behavior, because that means it means something, at least in terms of the correction that we're giving. Your dog is already naturally choosing avoidance behavior. Okay. In time, that avoidance could become submission, which is I also refer to as acceptance, which is, okay, we're walking down State Street. There's a parade of 20 dogs. I can't run from them. I'm not going to fight them. Can't avoid them. So I'm just going to accept that we're going to walk past each other, and we just, and then he just walks like
Is
nothing.
that where we want to be at? Or is that the best option? Or?
So we can't always get to that because we can't make the dog accept something, just like with a human. There's stuff that you may disagree with that no one can make you agree with, right? That is something you have to come to. So usually the best thing is just avoidance, right? Okay. So it's always, we don't want the dog to run. We don't want the dog to fight. That usually opens avoidance behavior, okay? And in time, through exposure, avoidance may become acceptance, or he may just stay in avoidance, right? which I tell people is okay, because what we don't want is fight response. What we don't want is him trying to attack, okay? So avoidance would be he's walking, and maybe instead of going to the other side of you, he just does this. And he turns his head when he walks past the dog, but once you're past the dog, he goes back to this. That's perfectly fine. So it's not always going to be extreme avoidance, where it's like, let me go all the way over here, and the dog's right there, okay? Every dog is different. Every case is different. It also comes down to how much does the owner push? How much does the owner reinforce everything? There's like a lot of variables that come into play, okay? So avoidance or submission are the two things that we want whenever we're dealing with this kind of behavior. Okay? Questions on that?
No.
Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I see you have an e-collar.
Yeah.
What brand and model is it? Do you know?
I could look it up.
Is it a circle remote? Or I can tell by the remote.
No, it's not. It's a full-fledged remote.
Okay.
It says
It looks like a Garmin, maybe?
Pet. It's off Amazon.
Okay. Was it like $80?
I would say even less than that, yeah.
When did you start that?
When we got here. I had bought it, but I never used it.
Sure.
And I've only used the vibrate mode. I've used the actual electric once, and it seems to be working. But I try to avoid using it.
Okay. So we do e-collar training. I'm sure you probably read that on the form or whatever.
Yeah.
We do prong and e-collar. And we actually use e-collar, and sometimes we use prong collar. Okay, prong collar is that spiky looking one that you may have seen on some dogs.
We had that too.
Yeah.
We haven't put it on them. So this was $23 off Amazon.
Okay, sure. So we're gonna need to upgrade that, okay? And then same thing for your prong collar. Did you get on Amazon?
We don't have it anymore.
Okay.
We used it on the older one, so we have a brown lab at home.
Okay.
And it was just because she pulled a lot when she walked, and it helped
Sure.
train her. But that was like a few years ago, but we
Sure.
haven't used it on him.
The best tool, in my opinion, is e-collar. Okay, now if you go online and you do your own research, you're gonna see two very opposing sides. Okay, just like in life, right? Just like with politics. There are those that are purely positive, treats, praise, affection only, no aversives. There's even some theories where you cannot tell your dog no. I have a client that was kicked out of a group class because she said no, because her puppy jumped on her and she went no out of human habit, and she literally got kicked out. So, and in our theory of training, it's a balance. We use both good and bad consequences to get the results that we're looking for, right? So dogs are physical creatures, as you've come to experience. They usually use nipping or biting or some form of mouth behavior to communicate with each other, to correct each other, to express their stress. The destruction of the Amazon box is a mouth-based behavior, right? Yeah. Tearing it apart because of the stress. It's got to go somewhere. Licking, panting, whining, salivating, nipping, chewing, biting, all mouth-based behaviors, right? So in your case here, if he did something to another dog and they did not like it, how do you think they would stop him?
The other dog? Biting back, I guess.
Biting back, right? Nipping and biting him. Hey, don't do that to me, right? And then he has a chance to decide, I'm going to allow you to correct me and I'm going to respect that correction. Or who are you to correct me? I'm going to correct you because I'm a higher ranking dog. You don't tell me what to do, okay? And then it becomes a back and forth potentially, right? That's completely natural to dog behavior. It starts as young as 3 to 4 weeks within the litter. They start nipping and biting each other, protecting food against each other if they have that instinct. The mom or the dad will correct their puppies using nipping and biting at that age. They start to have an understanding of what they can and can't do. They don't have right or wrong. It's what can I do and what can't I do, okay? So, and every dog's rules are different. Everything a dog tolerates is different. Just like with humans. You know, some people are close talkers, right? They don't really have that boundary, and other people talk at a distance. They're naturally respectful, right? Everybody's different. Same thing for the dog. So the e-collar or even your prong collar that you had, the prong collar, the reason why it looks the way it looks is because it's meant to mimic a dog bite. Okay, it's meant to mimic teeth. which is why it looks that way. People look at it and they think it's like a medieval torture device, right? Many years ago when I first started, was one of those people. I was completely against aversives. I'm like, I wouldn't put that on a dog. It looks terrible. But then as I started to grow as a trainer and I realized like certain things, a lot of things can't be fixed with only positivity, I started to open up. And then I learned, while these tools are valuable when used correctly. And then understanding dog behavior more. You know, the first time I got bit taught me a great lesson, like, and the dog did not care. I have 5 scars on my body from dog bites. This is a dog bite here. This is 10 stitches. This is a Great Dane, okay? He just didn't want to go in a kennel. He was not an aggressive dog. He had never been in the kennel before. He was a year and a half unneutered, never been made to do something. I was trying to put him in the kennel. He looked up and was like, I'm not going in. Boom, 10 stitches later, okay? But he's not an aggressive dog. He still comes here. He still comes to daycare. He still comes to boarding. We've never had an incident since, and I trained him in 2019, okay? And it's because of that moment. So he used his teeth to tell me, I'm not going in there. I'm scared. I don't know what that is, and I don't know you, right? So I don't take that personally. So with the e-collar and the prong collar, that allows us to communicate with these guys more on their level. However, it does have to be layered in correctly, okay? What I mean by layered in is exposing the dog correctly. We tend to think punishment-based. Punishment-based means, let's say you're walking him, he freaks out and he becomes reactive. You want to stop the reactivity, right?
Yeah.
So you have this tool where at the press of a button, it's supposed to punish him, to tell him, don't do that, which is technically how punishment theory works, right? But dogs are not meant to have their muscles contracted. They don't understand the technology. So sometimes it can exacerbate the problem and or make the dog anxious because they don't know why it happened. They have to understand what it is first, how it turns on, how it turns off, before we start applying it to things that we don't want, like that reactivity behavior, okay?
Yeah.
And that's where I come into play. Also, we want to make sure that we're using a professional level e-collar. The biggest difference is how the stimulation is delivered, okay? Have you ever had physical therapy or been to a chiropractor?
No.
Have you ever seen those machines that move muscles?
Yeah.
Yep. So a professional level e-collar is like that machine.
Okay.
It's just a muscle stimulator.
Okay.
Okay. The one that you have, and the one that I would recommend for you, runs around 330-ish with tax. Yours was 25-ish, right? You can see that big change in cost difference, right? It's because of that technology. Okay. So the lower end brands tend to come across more like what people describe as a shock, right? Because people call them shock collars.
Yeah.
I don't refer to them as shock collars because we use e-collars. It is electric, but the way it's delivered is not like a shock, okay? The lower brand ones are ones that I would describe more like a shock collar because that's how the stim does come across. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So, and the term shock comes from 2 places, just as FYI. One, it comes from the positive only front in training that wants to deter their clients from using these tools because no one wants to electrocute or shock their dog, right? So they use words like, oh, you're shocking your dog or would shock your dog to deter them from using that approach. It also comes from old school e-collars. They only had like 3, maybe 5 settings. My e-collar, the brand that I use, has 127 settings, okay? So 5 and 127 are the same. We just happen to have 122 more divisions. So it's very fine-tuned, okay? So that's also another important factor because back in the day, yeah, the jump between 2 to 3 was vast. It was great. And that came across as shocking to the dog. So that's also where that word comes from, okay? But we use the word remote collar and or e-collar here. And we don't say shock your dog, we say stim or nick because that's what it is,
Yeah,
okay? And the reason why I explained that because I think it's important because as the dog's owner, you don't want to hurt your dog. You don't want to make your dog worse. That's always the kind of the primary concerns, right? And when you start thinking shock or electrocute and all that stuff, obviously like that would be exactly what you're doing if you're using that kind of technology, but we don't, okay? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So the first thing that we need to do, and I know the behaviors that you're dealing with, right, and the inside behaviors, is we cover the heel command, which is walking on a leash. And I know, like, people are like, but Jesse, that's outside of what I'm dealing with, right? I go, well, technically, it is related because the reactivity is on leash behavior, okay? So once we get him to walk correctly, And our style of heel is very strict. If I take 2 steps, he takes 2 steps. I take 5 steps, he takes 5 steps. When I stop, he automatically sits with a completely slack leash. Okay, I'm not holding it tight like this. Mentally, he is walking with you. Okay, the reason why heel is so powerful is, one, it allows us to layer consequence on the dog, so that he understands how it turns on and how it turns off in a non-confrontational manner. People tend to think, oh, my dog was bad. No, don't do that, right? And they start getting big, and that can only increase the problem, okay? With the remote collar, there is none of that. You're just nipping and biting him like another dog would to tell him we don't want that, okay? So what ends up happening is he starts thinking, hey, there's rules and consequences now, and if I make this decision, this thing happens, I don't like it, but if I don't make that decision, nothing happens, right? He starts to understand kind of like where his, what his options are, because we're taking some away, okay? So by teaching a dog how to walk correctly and getting him to focus, we make him more stressed out over you than he is about the environment. Does that make sense? So we override one stressor with another stressor, which sounds bad, but that's just how that works, okay? So when he's walking with you, he now has to do math. If he's in that tight quarter, right, where he's like, okay, the last time I spazzed out, there was this bad thing, I didn't like it, but when what happens if I don't spaz out, right? The dog passes, he's like, what? Nothing happened with the dog, nothing happened with that, contraction, blah, 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 blah. Oh, I guess I can be around the dog in close proximity and nothing bad will happen. He has to experience that in order to be logical with that. But right now, he's just thinking potential threat, right? He's gotten over some dogs, like you mentioned earlier, he's gotten over, it seems like the small dogs, right? Yeah. But he could stay stuck with the bigger dogs, or potentially in time that also gets better, right? But the biggest thing is that it's on his terms and not your terms. So then one day he could always disagree. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But when you go out into the world and it's on your terms, he's like, well, I don't know if Dad's going to accept this or not accept this, and I'm just going to behave myself because I don't want consequence. Make sense? So we always start with the leash walking stuff. It's usually 2 classes, and we see what does it resolve, okay? Because you're my feedback. We have class 1 where I'm here with you. You have your setup and everything. I coach you through everything. I don't need to touch your dog, okay? So it's all hands-on for you. I give you your homework, you go off and practice, rinse and repeat. You come back class 2, you give me your progress. And you may say, hey, Jesse, man, this dog has never walked this good in my life. This is amazing. Or you might say, hey, Jesse, great improvement, but he's still struggling on the elevator, but he's good in the hallway. I go, great, we at least got the hallway done. Now we need to focus on the elevator, which makes sense because it's super tight quarters, right? So then we start to make adjustments there. We have our second class. I give you more homework. You come back and you're like, hey, Jesse, a little bit better, still struggling with dogs that bark at him. I go, okay, makes sense because now they're barking at him in a tight space or outside, right? Then we address it, and then we move on to the next thing, okay? So we're kind of doing 2 things at once. We teach the heel stuff, which is obedience, which is the foundation for addressing the reactivity and all this kind of uncertainty and stress here. And then you're my feedback. And then I just give you stuff to work on. You go off and you do your homework. You come back. You give me more information, and I go, okay, this is what we're going to do now. Okay. Every case is different. I've had cases where I do one class, and the person comes back, and it's a complete 180, and they're like, this dog is great. And I get other clients where it takes us 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks before we finally get the full 100% that we're looking for. The biggest factor is the owner doing the homework? Okay, if you're not doing the homework, if you're not following through with the instructions, we're not going to get anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So in your particular case here, I would put you at 6 to 9 classes. Okay. And it comes down to what you're wanting to achieve with your dog. From what I'm picking up so far, you want to be able to walk your dog. You want to correct the reactivity. The indoor stuff, I'm assuming, right, with the anxiety and all that stuff. And probably a better understanding of his behavior so that we avoid another potential human bite, right? Does that sound correct?
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would want to achieve in the training?
I guess, overall, I want him to go back to daycare. I want him to play with other dogs and release that energy.
Yep.
Bring him to a boarding and know that he'll be fine, and not get a call saying, hey, this dog's too aggressive, you got to come pick him up. We do travel a lot, and we do work, so I want to bring him to daycare and, board him from time to time. I guess that's what I ultimately would want.
Okay. So when it comes to daycares, that's a variable. Okay. So to give you an example, I have a dog here. It's a Newfoundland, those huge dogs. People usually recognize them as gentle giants. Not this guy. He's very leash reactive. Okay. He's a friendly dog, but on the leash, he's one of those ones that flip out, She did training with me last year, and then she tried to take him to another daycare, and then the first day he bit a dog and then didn't tell her. The second time she brought him, he bit another dog, and then they finally told her. And then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, he bit a dog last time, but we thought, shrug it off, it's a Newfoundland, blah, 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 blah. But it ended up being like $2,000 or $2,500 in damages. So they're like, oh, also you need to pay us. And she's like, but you never told me, and if you would have told me, I would have never brought him back, So she brought him here, and he did fine here, okay? So the reason why that is because most daycares are free-for-alls. Okay, where they just throw the dog into a lot of dogs, and then the dog's going to stress. Some dogs can tolerate it, some dogs can't. There's no structure. Usually it's very loud, it's constant, just noise. Whereas here, if you decided, with the training, I cannot guarantee with the training he would do well in another daycare. Okay, now if you took him to a daycare that had structure, I would say yes, his chances of doing better or doing well are much greater because you're taking him to a structured daycare with rules and boundaries. Okay. But he would be welcome to come here because we reinforce the training.
Well, I guess that's why I selected this place. I saw you do boarding, daycare,
Correct.
Training. So that's why I selected and had good reviews, and I did my homework.
Good, yeah.
I reached out to a few, and I liked overall how everything looked here. And that's one of the reasons why I selected, because there is the potential of daycare and boarding.
Correct.
But also that I could train him.
Correct, yes.
Right.
And we reinforce everything at no extra charge. Okay, so if you brought him here for daycare or boarding, you'd bring his equipment with us. We reinforce training, we apply, and he's able to do more activities as well. So we have dogs both that are untrained and trained by us, right? The untrained dogs, they have a full day, but there's stuff that they can't do because they're not trained. They don't have certain skills that other dogs do, right? Because there's playtime in the play groups, there's treadmill time, there's stationary control where a dog, they're put on the bed and they're like just, they have to do nothing, so to speak, but there's a lot going on. So they're just sitting there coexisting, just keeping calm while things are active in the environment. And then there's decompression time in the kennel, which is getting away from everything, just getting to relax. Whereas most places you're in a room full of dogs for a long period of time, and then you're in your kennel, and then you're back in a room of dogs. Okay, so it's a little bit spread out in terms of activity. If you wanted us to work on something specifically, training-wise, right? We're like, hey, can you guys work on his recall or something? There would be a fee for that because we're going out of our way to train him. But anything that occurs naturally throughout the day, there's no extra charge. And that's why we're able to run a quiet kennel. Before we moved here, we were in Logan Square. We were averaging 70 dogs a day, and it was quiet. You get the occasional whine, the occasional bark, but it was quiet. Okay. If you hear any barking when you're here, it's the neighbors. Got it. Okay, just so you know. And the reason why it's quiet is because we run a structured daycare. It's not a free-for-all, okay? Which helps guys like him. Because if he's in that constant noise, right, again, he's not going to do well. He's probably going to lead to something. But once dogs understand the routine here, they settle in quite nicely. And then, we're able to give them nice full days full of activity, okay?
Yep.
So in terms of the length of the program, I would suggest in person for you because you're the one that needs to understand your dog, right? Mainly because there is reactivity and there's been a couple of human things there, is it would benefit you greatly to understand that better so that you can avoid it, but also that you can address it. We also offer daycare and board and train programs, as you may have read. The reason why I don't advise those for you is simply we can get a lot done here, but we can't make certain things happen, right? We can try to push reactivity, but we can't guarantee it'll happen, right? So, but also you drop your dog off and he comes, drop him off one way, you pick him up a different way, but you don't understand how he got there. And that understanding is what's really important. Okay. Even though you do get follow-ups with either program, I always tell everybody the learning and understanding of your dog and his behavior is the greatest tool that you'll have aside from the remote collar, okay? Because no one's perfect. Your dog's not gonna be perfect. If you go 2 years without seeing something and then one day you see something, well, that doesn't mean the training didn't work. I mean, the training worked really well. It took you 2 years to see something, right? It's now we've greatly declined that behavior so that we're not seeing it on an everyday basis, I get clients that have to take their dog at 3 a.m. in the morning because they want to avoid dogs. I had a client that lived in a high-rise building on the 25th floor and would take the stairs up and down because she didn't want to come across dogs, And now with the training, she can hop on an elevator, go up and down. She doesn't have to worry about that anymore, So does that make sense?
Yep.
If you did a 6-class program, the way I would break it down, it would be the first 2 classes on HEAL, like I mentioned, and we see what does that resolve, okay? For whatever reason, we're still struggling with reactivity, not a problem. 3rd class, we focus on reactivity. I tell you, this is what we're gonna need to do, okay? Now, I'm very much about, I wanna make sure that you're getting results or that you're making progress before we continue on. So let's say we hit that 3rd class, you're like, man, Jesse, I'm still struggling with this reactivity. I go, okay, no problem. We're gonna work on it. And then I'd probably tell you, don't come back for at least 2 weeks, okay? Because I wanna make sure that you make progress before I see you again, okay? Let's say in those 2 weeks, we don't make as much progress as we want. I would say, hey, try this stuff via email or something, and then tell you, take another 2 weeks before you come back, okay? Because once you understand how to address behavior, it's really just like go out and do it and get it done. And then once you find the answer, it's gonna be night and day, okay? Because if I see you class 4, class 5, class 6, it could be the end of your program and you're still struggling. But all you need is time. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So in that case, I would tell you, okay, try this out, take a couple more weeks, and then when you're like, hey, Jesse, we finally squashed it, we're making good progress now, I'm ready for my 4th class. I go, great, come back, and then we continue on again, okay? Because I don't want to keep using your time and money when I know we'll get the solution, you just need more time to get it done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So 2 on HEAL, maybe 1 on reactivity. The next thing I would recommend is stationary control, which is, go to your bed, don't move for an hour, 2 hours, whatever. This will allow you to, if you ever during the summer or spring want to go to a restaurant with him and not have to worry about him being stressed at the restaurant, giving him something to do where he's contained and under control. It's also good for guys like this because you can see here how he's not settled yet. Any other dog would be laying down, sleeping at your feet. But he's been standing and you can see him just doing this, right? Yeah. He does not have the ability to just completely relax. So this would allow us to get him to relax on our terms, okay? Until he learns how to relax better on his terms. Last thing would be recall, which is come when called. So just in case if he got off the leash, we have the ability to return our dog. So that technically makes 5 classes. 2 on HEAL, 1 on reactivity, 1 on place command, 1 on recall, which leaves us number 6 as a variable, okay? Maybe you want to cover recall again. Maybe you had a snafu with reactivity, you want to cover it again, we have that 6th class. If you did 9 classes, it gives us more time just in case. When it comes to obedience, it's very straightforward. I know what I can get done within the time frame. When it comes to behavior, it's a variable, okay? Because I can only assume or assess the level of intensity through what you're telling me. Sometimes I'm wrong, it's rare, but it does happen. So like when I mentioned with that client that when I went to the in-home, the dog ended up being way aggressive than I anticipated. Sometimes that happens, but it's very rare, okay? So if you did 9 classes, it gives us a bigger window in case we need more time with the reactivity stuff. The next thing would also be, let's say everything's going well, I can help you with your training, get up to a more advanced level, okay? So there's gonna be some, how would you say, whether it's we have enough time to work on the behavior and or we'll take his training even further because we were able to resolve the behavior in good time.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Question on any of that stuff?
No, I guess the hard part is how do I know, obviously I would want to bring him where there's 2 or 3 dogs. I can't always guarantee that I'll have 2 or 3 dogs for him to be around so I know that he's, avoiding or I could call him back and all that stuff. And that's why I wanted to see how it would work with in daycare training or whatever so we could test that out without me here, obviously.
Sure, like whether or not he's learning this stuff.
Yeah.
So you can purchase training sessions that are done here that are much cheaper. I think they're $25, $35 per class that would go in conjunction with your in-person, right?
Okay.
So that we could test them in an environment. Now, let's say you're doing your training, you enroll him into daycare, so we're kind of doing both things at the same time with each other, and we find he is a social dog and stuff, and then we can set it up. So the main thing we have to worry about is always liability, right? So like, let's say for whatever reason he's not doing well in daycare, even though we're trying to socialize him and all that stuff, he's just uneasy. It's going to take time, or we can't make him comfortable, right? Then we use a muzzle, because at least we can put him in a situation and not worry about if there's aggression, potential harm to another dog. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If he's completely social, like, yeah, he's doing great here, no problem, then it's like, okay, cool, can I have a session where we put some dogs in a playpen because I want to test this training around dogs? We go, sure, not a problem, okay? We always just want to make sure that we're cautious about what we do, just to keep everybody safe, okay? So otherwise, if it's like you're doing your training, you're like, hey guys, I want to test his recall around dogs. I'm going to be out of town. Can you do a couple of training sessions with him? We go, sure. We set it up and we do it and all that stuff, and then we let you know, like, hey, he did really well. But please note that how he responds with us versus how he responds with you may be different, because of how strict you are with the training. If you're as strict as we are, he's going to be the same, okay? If you're not as strict as we are, he will do better with us, but not with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And this is all stuff, of course, you would learn as we advance in the training. But there are ways to test his obedience in a controlled context with dogs around. It just comes down to if we're able to get him to open up and be comfortable with the other dogs.
Okay.
Okay.
So you recommend start with a training and avoid daycare for now, or?
So if you start training in person, by the second class, at the end of the second class, you can then enroll him into daycare. Okay. Yeah. The reason why I say by the second class is because we want him to come with enough discipline that when he comes here, we can build off of that. Okay. Now, I've also had other clients who've had to kind of just throw their dog into daycare because of their schedule, or they have a trip coming up and all that stuff. They're like, I want to just get this done at the same time. That's also doable. Okay. We just wouldn't press him as quickly and as much as we would if he had already had some training. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if he comes in with nothing, there's only so much we can do. But if he comes in with a training collar or some training, we go, okay, cool, we can build on this, and we're able to get more done.
Got
okay?
it. Yeah.
But either is fine. Okay?
All right, makes sense.
Other questions?
No, I think you've answered them all.
For the e-collar that I would recommend, I would put them on the Dogtra Black Edition. And Maria will send you the information.
So just gonna take a call or no?
No, go ahead.
Hey, babe. I'm still in training, sorry. Okay, thank you. All right. Repeat that. It was the
It's a Dogtra Black Edition.
dog, sorry?
DOGTRA.
TRA.
Yeah, Black Edition. And Maria will send you the information for it.
Okay.
Don't try to get it on Chewy, because Chewy doesn't have it. I've had a few clients buy it off of there, and it's a wrong model. It'll literally say Black Edition on the box. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them through the company Dogtra themselves. You can get them through us. I don't care.
1900 series. I don't know. There's one for like 239.
So that's not the correct one. The one that's correct is going to be more around 300 and something, and it'll literally say Black Edition on the box. So
yeah, I don't know. There's one for 299. It says Black Edition, but
that's probably it.
Okay.
I don't care where you get the collar from. I just care that you get the correct model. Okay.
Okay.
The reason why this is important is the one that's 239 is meant for a 35-pound dog and under. Okay. And I know online it'll say like 70 pounds and blah 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 blah. However, that's incorrect. When we train as many dogs as I do in a day, and over the course of 12 years, you start to learn like what they can really do. That collar there is meant for a 70-pound dog and over. It's perfectly safe to use on a dog his size, which is probably like a 50-pound dog.
Yeah, it's 55 pounds.
Yeah. It just means we get more from less, okay? Because it has a high output. I could put out my 8-pound Chihuahua and he would be perfectly fine, okay? On a lower powered collar, his number could be 50 out of 127. On the high powered collar, his number could be 20 to 30 out of 127, which gives us a bigger window to work with, because we want to factor in, if he goes into a frenzy, do we have enough to cut through and shut that down? That's always what we're thinking about, okay? We want to think worst case scenario. If you get a lower powered collar, and we've had this happen where a dog will override the collar because when they're in aggression, it's your adrenaline's pumping. You're not feeling anything, right? So if you've ever been in a fight where you get punched and you don't feel it in the fight, but then after the fight, you're like, oh man, my jaw is sore. Same thing for the dog, okay? So with that collar, it's the best collar there is. I'm not worried about, are we gonna be able to cut through it? Super, super rare that we get a dog that does override the high-powered collar. It's probably happened to me a handful of times in 12 years. And typically you can tell because they're 150-pound dogs. So they're like massive. So you're going into it going like, okay, this is probably not gonna work for the dog. He needs 2 collars or whatever. So most common question that I get is, when does the e-collar go away? In my book, when you need it, it doesn't. So what this means is when you're walking through your building, when you're outside, if he's gonna be off leash, you need your collar. Also for the in-home stuff, right? Because you're unsure how his behavior is gonna be for the in-home. That's where 9 classes would also come into play, because then we have time to also test out the in-home stuff to make sure that everything's fine there, okay? So if you did 6, I'll get as much done as I can, but I usually focus on the most important stuff. So it'd be heel, reactivity. You could have the in-home, but we may not get recall or something like that, okay? With 9, we have a bigger window to get that stuff done.
Okay.
Let's say walk through the hallways, outside with the reactivity stuff, getting all that squashed. And then like with people coming over, like if it's like, hey, like he's kind of uneasy, but with the e-collar, he's much better than when people come over, you put the e-collar on. And then when the people leave, you take the e-collar off, okay? People always ask like, well, if the training is so good or so effective, why do I need it post the training? Simple answer is opportunistic behavior, okay? Easiest way to describe opportunistic behavior is, do you drive?
Yeah.
Do you go on the expressway?
Yes.
Do you go the speed limit?
Yes.
I'm gonna take that as
I'm on record.
So the reason why most people don't, right? Because of when you see the speed limit, there's it's coming up for lunch. Unless there's a police officer, right, or a squad car, you're good. Are you going for lunch?
No, I was just gonna ask you a quick question, but if you're busy in the consultation.
Yeah, but I got like 5-10 more minutes.
Okay.
Or is it urgent?
No, 5 minutes is good.
Okay.
All right.
Is most people speed, and then when they see that cop car, they slow down. And then when they pass the cop car, they speed up, right? That's called opportunistic behavior. When you can get away from it, you can, or you might try, right? Same thing for the dog. When they don't have that e-collar on, and he's outside, he's like, can I get away with it today? He may try it, okay? So it's just opportunistic behavior. So I like to describe that e-collar as a cop on a collar. When it's present, your dog doesn't behave better because he knows there's sort of consequence. You also happen to have control, right? The other thing is, we can't account for life. Sometimes you go out into the world and there's an off-leash dog running straight at you, okay? So I wanna know that in the moments where I've lost control in the environment, I can still regain control in my personal context. Okay, and you would think in the city of Chicago, off-leash dogs wouldn't really be a thing. It's very much a thing. Okay, even if you're in the, I have a client also in the River North area. She was walking her dog, and this guy was with his baby stroller with an off-leash pitty. Pitty ran straight to her dog. Right, luckily nothing happened, but she was very much scared because she's like a 90-pound young lady with her 50-pound dog with this 100-pound pit charging at them, you know. So we want to make sure that even in the setting where we lost control, we want to be able to get that control back.
Okay.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Questions on any of that stuff?
No, I'm comfortable leaving it on. I always put it on when I walk him. The only time I remove him is when we're at home. Otherwise, I always leave on him just in case. Like you said, I can never be too sure in life, so I always have it on him. I'm okay with that.
Yes, and it shouldn't feel like you're always having to use it. It's just present just in case something happens. Okay. So, any other questions?
Nope.
If you happen to remember anything that you may have wanted to ask, or something comes up, feel free to ask Maria. If it pertains to me, she'll shoot me an email. I'll get back to her. She'll forward it to you. She will send you a contract to review and everything like that. If you want to kind of expedite the process a little bit and try to get in sooner rather than later, she goes by the contract. So once that's submitted, she knows, hey, you're serious. But then also you could email her and say, hey, Maria, sign me up. I want 6, sign me up for 9, blah, 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 blah. And if you give her the schedule or your schedule, right? Because that's what she's going to ask you for, is you're already giving her with all the information, and all you need to do is sign your contract, so it kind of just speeds things up a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
Feel free to read the contract, ask any questions about it that you may want to ask, but just keep in mind that she does go by the contract, because we have clients ask questions and stuff, and it'll delay the contract, and then other people sign up, and then by the time they're ready to sign up, they're like, hey, what happened? I thought Jesse had availability. She's like, well, in that exchange, he got booked. Also keep in mind, holidays are coming up. You know, we have Christmas and we have the New Year. I will be out of town the 29th through January 6th. And also that winter is coming, okay, and there's gonna be snow here. So even though we can train indoors, do keep in mind that when you do your training, you may be outdoors, okay? It doesn't matter that we see each other week after week after week. It just matters that once I've taught you something, that you're consistent with it, okay? So if I don't see you for a week or two, it's not a big deal. It just gives you more time to work on stuff and see what's not working and what's working.
Yeah.
Okay? Otherwise, I don't believe you have a human aggressive dog. I think you just got a dog that got lost in the frenzy. And, unfortunately, that happened. And that I would just keep doing with what you're doing. I don't see anything that you need to stop doing. And then we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I think you've answered everything. How, like from one training to